Good morning out there to all you tenacious teens and tweens. I am your host, Jamie Barr.
And I'm your co-host, Matt Whitaker.
Can you believe it, Mad? It's the last day of Camp Rama, and thus the final edition of the GRA Camp Rama morning show. Yeah, I always get bummed on the last day of camp. I'm always so inspired by our campers, and it's been such a fantastic week, but it's hard knowing I won't be seeing my new summertime friends as often.
I feel you, Jamie, but fear not. We have GRA's Mighty Network, so we'll be able to stay in touch with our new friends, bandmates, and mentors.
That's true.
We really have enjoyed our time with y'all and hope that the feeling's mutual. We can't wait to see you at one of our GRA upcoming in-person events.
That does make me feel a little better, man. Plus, it helps knowing how much our campers learned this week. You know, we've discussed everything from healthy communication skills to learning how to clearly express your ideas, your feelings, and your boundaries, and how our self-image and identity shape our lives and our outlook of the world.
As well as the good, the bad, and the ugly parts of social media. Not to mention all the cool and handy GRA camp culture mantras like don't yuck my yum, one diva, one mic, share the story, not the details, and step up, step up.
Don't forget, I'm not sorry, I rock. And possibly our most important mantra, be a croissant, not a bagel. It's about being open and welcoming new ideas, experiences, people, which leads me to today's subject of social justice.
We'll be discussing privilege and how it shapes our lives and the way we see other people.
We'll be talking about how to face the issues of racism, trans, and homophobia head on. Our Girls Rock compadre, Muna Javed, is here to discuss how to be a good ally so we can discuss potentially dangerous situations and find systemic solutions for systemic problems, such as anti-Blackness.
We'll also have some interesting information regarding how people of color, as well as folks who identify as LGBTQ+, have helped shape the music we know and love.
We hope you take the lessons, skills, and information you've learned this week and use it to help in your day-to-day life, as well as out in the world, and try to make it a more welcoming, inclusive place for all. So live a good life, be good to others, and now, on with the show!
Go forth and rock!
We all know what racism is when we see it up close, but we may not always be able to identify how it affects us or how we may knowingly or unknowingly receive benefits because of it. Muna Javed, our fam from the Houston Girls Rock Camp, leads this workshop on anti-racism and anti-Blackness, and we'll talk about how racism and anti-Black sentiment is embedded in our society through different laws, regulations, and stereotypes. She's also going to give you the lowdown on the meaning of white privilege and how to use it to be a better ally. And no, it doesn't mean a white person didn't have a hard life. It's just that the color of their skin was not the reason or the cause of their struggles. Take it away, Muna.
Hi, campers. Thanks for being here with me today. My name's Muna, and I am going to be doing a workshop on anti-racism. Specifically, my workshop is going to be on systemic racism, white privilege, anti-Blackness, and how to be an ally. Before I get started, I wanted to introduce myself. My pronouns are she, her. I've been with camp for, I would say, about 10 years, and I'm a drummer, and social justice, advocacy, these kinds of issues are really important to me, and that was the motivation behind this workshop, just to share information that I've got and, learn from you all. because that's what this is all about. So before I get started, one thing that I like to do is review some community agreements. And these can apply literally anywhere. It doesn't have to be in a camp setting or in a workshop. It could be in your band practice or with your friends. Um, you know, these are agreements that, can be applied universally. So the first one is one diva, one mic. That is that one person speaks at a time. It's important that everybody gets that platform to be able to speak without interruption. And the other one is no one knows everything. Together we know a lot. So we have something to learn from everyone in the room. Everybody comes with unique experiences and experiences that are special and unique to you. So there's going to be things that you don't know, or that you know that I don't know. And there's things that I'm going to know that you might know and you might not know. And so we're all here to learn, basically. So the other one is move up, move up. So if you're someone that tends not to speak a lot, try to move up in the role of speaking more. And if you tend to speak a lot, please move up in a role of listening more. So this could apply even in, a comment section or a chat or a video call, is that, if typically you're someone that doesn't speak up, like maybe try to move up and speak more if you're comfortable with that. And if you tend to speak a lot, maybe kind of move up in a listening role, right? One of the ones that I love the most is this next one, which is we can't be articulate all the time. And I'm going to trip up on my words. And, people who have a fear of messing up or stumbling over their words. We just want everybody to feel comfortable participating, and no one's perfect. So I'll mess up, and that's okay, because, that's what it's all about, learning and messing up and getting back up and trying again. So finally, another one of my faves is be curious. So just allow that space for curiosity and creative thinking. Some of the most intelligent and interesting people I know are always asking questions and always curious. So that curious mind is what kind of breeds knowledge, right? So quick, simple community agreements that I just wanted to review. So like I said, anti-racism is the title of my workshop, and I am going to be discussing systemic racism, white privilege, anti-Blackness, and how to be an ally. So individual versus systemic racism. I think we're all pretty aware of what individual racism is, and if we're not, then I have the definition up here for you. But individual racism is kind of that racism that we're all understand it to be, growing up, we just know that it's prejudice, discrimination, being antagonistic against another race, believing that your own race is superior. So that's kind of that basic definition of racism that we all know. What I wanted to talk about today was systemic racism. It could also be known as structural or institutional racism. So systemic racism is more about the systems and the structures or the institutions that create inequalities and differences in many areas of our lives. This could include, wealth, the criminal justice system, employment, housing, healthcare, politics, education. So these are the kinds of things that create systemic injustices. So it's not just, oh, I don't like this person because of the color of their skin. It's more about this whole group of people has less access because of racism that is pervasive throughout a system. For example, in schools, or in the workplace, or in hospitals and healthcare. It's a much kind of bigger systemic issue than just the one-on-one, prejudice or discrimination, if that makes sense. So one of the things that I found that helped me understand systemic racism, or I feel like would help give you like a basic understanding of systemic racism, was this video that I wanted to share, and I'll go ahead and play that for you now.
This is Jamal. Jamal is a boy who lives in a poor neighborhood. He has a friend named Kevin who lives in a wealthy neighborhood. All of Jamal's neighbors are African American, and all of Kevin's neighbors are white. Because Jamal's school district is mostly funded by property taxes, his school is not very well funded. His classrooms are overcrowded, his teachers are underpaid, and he doesn't have access to high-quality tutors or extracurricular activities. Kevin's school district is also funded by property taxes, so his school is very well funded. His classrooms are never crowded, his teachers are very well paid, and he has access to high-quality tutors and lots of extracurricular activities. Kevin and Jamal live only a few streets away from each other. So how come they're growing up in such different worlds with such different opportunities for success? The answer has to do with America's history of systemic racism. To understand it better, let's look at what life was like for Kevin and Jamal's grandparents. Decades after the Civil War, many government agencies started to draw maps dividing cities into sections that were either desirable or undesirable for investment. This practice was called redlining, and it usually blocked off entire Black neighborhoods from access to private and public investment. Banks and insurance companies used these maps for decades to deny Black people loans and other services based purely on race. Historically speaking, owning a home and getting a college education is the easiest way for an American family to build wealth. But when Jamal's grandparents wanted to buy a house, the banks refused because they lived in a neighborhood that was redlined. So Jamal's grandparents were not able to buy a home, and because colleges could prevent them from attending through legal segregation, their options for higher education were really scarce. Kevin's grandparents, on the other hand, got a low-interest loan to buy their first house and got accepted into a handful of top universities, which traditionally only accepted white students. This opened up a wealth of opportunities that they were able to pass on to their kids and grandkids. Even as late as the 1980s, an investigation into the Atlanta real estate market showed that banks were more willing to lend to low-income white families than to middle or upper-income African-American families. As a result, today, for every $100 of wealth held by a white family, Black families have $5.04. A 2017 study confirms that redlining is still affecting home values in major cities like Chicago today. This explains how Kevin and Jamal inherited vastly different circumstances. Unfortunately, the story doesn't end there. A big part of systemic racism is implicit bias. These are prejudices in society that people are not aware that they have. Let's go back to Kevin and Jamal. Against all odds, Jamal manages to be the only student from his high school to get accepted into a great university, the same one that Kevin and his high school friends are attending. But after Kevin and Jamal both graduate, Jamal notices that his resume isn't drawing as much interest as Kevin's, even though they graduated from the same program with the exact same GPA. Unfortunately for Jamal, studies show that resumes with white-sounding names get twice as many callbacks as identical resumes with Black-sounding names. Implicit bias is one of the reasons why the Black unemployment rate is twice the rate of white unemployment, even among college graduates today. You can see evidence of systemic racism in every area of life. The disparities in family wealth, incarceration rates, political representation, and education are all examples of systemic racism. Unfortunately, the biggest challenge with systemic racism is that there's no single person or entity responsible for it, which makes it very hard to solve. So what can you do? The first thing you can do is work towards becoming more aware of your own implicit biases. What are some prejudices that you might hold that you're not aware of? Second, let's acknowledge that the consequences of slavery and Jim Crow laws are still affecting access to opportunity today. As a result, we should support systemic changes that create more equal opportunities for everyone. Increasing public school funding and making it independent from property taxes would be a great start so that poor and wealthy districts can receive equal access to resources. Systemic problems require systemic solutions. Luckily, we're all part of the system, which means that we all have a role to play in making it better. Peace. This is
So I thought that kind of little vignette of Kevin and Jamal would help illustrate what systemic racism is. And you can see that Kevin and Jamal grew up, not far from each other, right? But they had vastly different experiences. And that was due to systemic racism. So like they said in the video, so many things are affected by systemic racism. Your access to employment, your access to education, how you're treated by law enforcement. So just to give you a little bit of facts and figures, Black unemployment rates have been consistently 2 times higher than that of whites for the past 60 years. And like in the video, it was saying, someone with a quote unquote Black sounding name, their resume could be identical to that of their white counterpart. And, they just wouldn't receive a callback. That's an example of systemic racism. Or in the education system, for example, Black students are 3 times more likely to be suspended than white students for, similar, behavioral issues, for example. 3 times more likely to be suspended. So that means that, their behaviors are punished at 3 times higher the rate, even though it's the same exact behavior. And then Black drivers are 30% more likely than whites to be pulled over by the police. So, you know how in the video they mentioned implicit bias? These are the things that affect, the Black community in institutions like education or in the workplace, is that implicit bias. Implicit bias is choosing one over the other based on ideas that you hold about specific races that oftentimes you might not even recognize that you're doing. And that's kind of the tricky thing about this, is that it's something that you have to recognize and actively unlearn and be anti-racist to understand that you too might hold some of these implicit bias. Some other examples are, within healthcare or housing, like it said in the video, where it described redlining, where, it says systematic denial of services to residents of specific neighborhoods. Now, technically this was outlawed in the 60s, but, that practice, its effects just never really went away. So you can see in the picture with the houses, 72% of homeowners are white and only 42% of homeowners are Black. And healthcare, 67% of doctors have unconscious racial biases. Again, they don't even oftentimes recognize that that's what they're doing. But then with these numbers, you can see, like, why are Black mothers 4 times more likely to die from pregnancy complications, right? So these are just like different examples for you to see how systemic racism affects these major institutions in our lives. So one of the things that comes out of that systemic racism is white privilege. And white privilege, I think, can often be confused as, you know, white people or the white community thinking that, you know, that their life hasn't been hard or that they haven't experienced hardships. That's not what white privilege necessarily means. It just means that being white is not one of the causes of their struggles. So societal privileges that benefit white people beyond what is commonly experienced by people of color under the same social, political, and economic circumstances. So basically, white privilege exists due to a lot of the historical racisms, like, you know, 400 years of slavery, you know, and then into things like redlining, like it was described in the video, things that are designed to oppress people of color. White privilege exists because of those differences. And again, it doesn't mean that a white person's life has not been hard. It just simply means that your skin tone is not one of the causes of those struggles. So white privilege means that you basically benefit from the oppression of people of color. So think about it, like when you're in a store and you're looking at skincare products or makeup, are those things designed for you first? You know, when you watch movies or you watch TV shows, when you look at, you know, these characters in TV shows or movies, do you feel like you're represented? Or at work or in school? Do you work with people that look like you? Does anybody ask about your citizenship? You know, do you get harassed for just existing in public? So these are some questions to ask about how you might actively benefit from white privilege. And if you're white, then what can you do with your white privilege? Well, you can teach other white people about the barriers to success for people of color. You can talk about systemic racism. You can promise to listen and to amplify the voices of people of color. You can, instead of being, you know, basically be more than just, I'm not racist. You have to actively be anti-racist and confront racial injustices even when it's uncomfortable, which it definitely can be, but it's important to advocate and amplify for Black and communities of color. So one of the things that I wanted to talk specifically about is anti-Blackness. And you might think, well, what's the difference? Racism is racism, right? Well, that's not necessarily the case, because racism is not specific enough of a term to really describe what Black people in this country face. So if you look at like East Asian communities or South Asian communities, Latinx communities, you'll find that there is a very pervasive anti-Black sentiment often. And so this names that, you know, slavery was obviously the most obvious and notorious form of anti-Blackness. And it technically ended 150 years ago, but it just continues to have an impact on the way people view and treat Black people in the US today. So ask yourself, you know, within your own communities, if you're a person of color, you know, how are you actively speaking out against anti-Blackness? You know, And here's some examples that I wanted to share. So schools punishing Black students for wearing their natural hair, right? I've had friends experience that back when I was in college, telling people that they sound more educated if they don't use African American vernacular, which is short for Ave. That is one of the most common forms of anti-Blackness, is to be critical of that very cultural way of speaking for the Black community. Being scared or intimidated by someone because they're Black, expecting a person's work to be inferior because they're Black, denying someone a job because they're Black. Then you can also see this within relationships, not dating someone because they're Black, or engaging in colorism, light skin versus dark skin, using the N-word when referring to a Black person. I'm sure you may have heard, I know that in the South Asian community, a lot of people, they want to like embrace and appropriate Black culture, but then will participate in totally anti-Black kind of conversations or rhetoric. So it's our job as people of color to call out anti-Blackness when we hear it. And blackface, like, that's kind of still something that you sometimes will see, like on Halloween and things like that. Say something. It's not okay. How to start eradicating anti-Blackness? So acknowledging it, addressing it, asking yourself, how have you contributed to anti-Blackness through personal interactions? Kind of doing that self-reflection, looking at this list, thinking about social situations you've been in. Have you participated in it yourself, laughed at a joke, let it go when someone, said something, very anti-Black? Educating yourself on the history of anti-Blackness, identifying, celebrating, and speaking about Black excellence, supporting Black-owned businesses and Black-led organizations. Listen to and believe Black people when they speak about race, racism, discrimination, exclusion, and prejudice. Obviously, one of the biggest conversations right now is, Black Lives Matter. Do not challenge Black Lives Matter. It's, you hear, people say all lives matter. Well, all lives matter. All lives cannot matter until Black Lives Matter. So having those conversations about anti-Blackness and sharing the things that you've learned with others, sharing this information that I shared with you all, and then, doing your own research, finding information online, talking to your friends. But these are all things to recognize within your communities, and how to address them in order to fight anti-Blackness. All important. So I love this chart on becoming anti-racist. So it's kind of divided up in 3 categories: the fear zone, the learning zone, and the growth zone. We currently are out of the fear zone because here we are in the learning zone, right? So high five on that. The fear zone is you just deny that racism is even a problem. Oh, it doesn't exist, I want to avoid those hard questions. I just want to be comfortable and talk to people that just, think and look like me, right? But moving on into the learning zone, that's when you're seeking out questions that make you uncomfortable. understanding your own privilege and ignoring racism, educating yourself about race and structural racism, and just being vulnerable. Know that you're going to have your own bias and you're going to have knowledge gaps. Just recognizing that this is a present and current problem and wanting to learn more about it. Then finally, reaching that growth zone where I want to sit in this discomfort and speak out when I see racism in action. I want to educate my peers on racism and how it, can be harmful. And one thing that I really want to emphasize is don't let mistakes deter me from being better. You're gonna make mistakes, you're gonna mess up, and that's okay. It's part of learning, and you're gonna stumble, and it's not gonna be perfect, but just trust the process and, just do your best. Try to promote and advocate for, policies and leaders that are anti-racist. Just keep growing and keep learning. Being an ally, right? Okay, this is an important kind of part of this whole process. And one of the interesting things I've heard as far as allyship is even rejecting the term ally and saying you're an accomplice or a co-conspirator. I heard from this organization, Indigenous Action, and they had this really great quote that said, "When we fight back or forward together, becoming complicit in a struggle toward liberation, we are accomplices." And I just loved that. So call it what you want. Accomplice, co-conspirator, ally, but listen. So if a Black, Indigenous person of color is telling you something is inappropriate, listen, apologize. Don't repeat the mistake again. Help. Open up spaces for those without privilege. Read useful literature on allyship and anti-Blackness. Call out behaviors which negatively impact others. And of course, amplify both online and in real life the voices of those without your privilege. So if you find yourself in a situation where you have the opportunity to advocate for someone or include someone that might not be there at the table or who need their voices heard, speak up. Ask why you don't have more representation from a various group that is not visible. So ask those questions and amplify those voices. I just put together some responses to racist comments, just that might be helpful for y'all. When you hear it in conversation, or if you're out in public or in a group setting, if you're at work or at school, and someone says a racist comment, say, could you clarify what you mean by that? Or that, that doesn't sound very funny to me. It sounds racist. Or as your friend, I feel obligated to let you know that that remark was racist. Ask, is the person's race relevant to this story? And, I don't really feel comfortable when you make comments like that. Or if it's on social media, you could, message someone and say, I saw what you posted today, and honestly, it made me feel angry, and here's why. Or, I didn't want to single you out before, but that comment made me uncomfortable. Or do you have evidence to support that belief? I know you were trying to make a joke, but here's why it was offensive. Or, hey, I want to follow up on why I responded yikes to your comment. Check out this article, explains things better than I could. So I've found that that's helpful for me in the past. Like if I can't really articulate something like I want, I can find like resources or articles online that might help me kind of express that feeling. And one of the things I wanted to do was to talk about Black Lives Matter specifically in this. And I think that's important because Black Lives Matter is a conversation that is really prevalent right now because, it started 7 years ago, which I think a lot of people might not know, that it's been around for almost 10 years. 7 years ago, it started off with a hashtag, Black Lives Matter. And basically, Black Lives Matter was an organized movement in the US in protest of police brutality against Black people. And another thing a lot of people might not know is Black Lives Matter was started by 3 Black women, Alicia Garza, Patrice Couillars, and Opal Tometi. Beautiful names and beautiful people that started this movement. And the reason for this movement was basically like, protesting police brutality. And, right now in this moment, it is such a huge conversation because of the protests and amplifying Black voices and understanding that this problem of systemic racism has been so pervasive within our systems that law enforcement has used that to systematically kill Black people. So I want to make that really clear that this movement is literally about Black lives and how they are disproportionately targeted and killed by law enforcement. So I just wanted to take a moment to recognize this movement and the importance of this movement at this time, and some of the individuals that have that we've lost. So Ola Watoyin Salau, Elijah McClain, Dominique Remy, Rhea Milton. I just wanted to have a moment of silence for the lives that have been lost. So we can just give them a moment of silence. Okay. I just want to thank everybody for joining me today, and I hope that this information resonated with you and that you were able to take away some tools and education to further your conversations around anti-racism and specifically systemic racism, white privilege, anti-Blackness, and how to be an ally. And I hope to have some really good conversation around this, in the comment section or on the message board. So if you have thoughts on ways in which you can advocate or amplify Black, Indigenous, people of color, their voices, and what ways in which you can kind of fight to be anti-racist, whether it's through, contacting elected officials, going out to protests and rallies, or having difficult conversations with your friends or family, or writing letters to institutions and asking them to have more visibility and representation in their leadership at your schools or at your jobs to, have, more diversity training or just spaces to be able to talk about these things. I'd love to hear from you. So that is my workshop, and thank you for spending this time with me in their leadership at your schools or at your jobs to, have, more diversity training or just spaces to be able to talk about these things. I'd love to hear from you. So that is my workshop, and thank you for spending this time with me. I really appreciate it. Thanks.
There's a history in this country of adopting certain elements of Black culture, like the blues and jazz, rock and roll, rap, pop. Yeah, almost every style of American music can really trace its roots back to Black culture. Without the influences of African American culture, there would be no American music, at least not how we think of it. Yet, in spite of folks embracing their music, fashion, and even the way they speak, many still hold on to anti-Black sentiment, so much so that some folks try to erase or minimize the achievements of Black musicians in our history. Today we'll discuss some of those amazing Black artists and musicians whose contributions helped shape our culture as Americans.
What is up, Camp Rama? My name is Nettie Albaroji, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about Black music history. American music is Black music. Without the influences of African American culture, there would be no American music, at least not how we think of it. Spirituals, also known as Negro spirituals or African American spirituals, are a genre of American folk music that articulate the suffering and longing for freedom and religious passion of African Americans during slavery and the hard times that would follow. Religious hymns, work songs, along with traditional African rhythms and chanting styles all contributed to the development of Negro spirituals that expressed the African Americans' hopes through hardships. By combining Christian themes and West and Central African musical elements, spirituals became a way of preserving native African culture. Many spirituals were secretly coded to spread messages between these enslaved peoples that expressed their plans for revolt against oppression and detailed organized escape routes to freedom, inspiring a sense of community and aiding as tools for rebellion. As these songs were passed down from generation to generation, many of these spirituals were adapted into new circumstances that would become the inspiration for the expressions of protests for times like the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s. The influence of African American spirituals can still be heard today in pop music, rock and roll, jazz, and even a cappella show tunes. Furthermore, they were absolutely fundamental in the creation of gospel music, rock and roll, jazz, R&B, and of course, hip hop. These songs laid out the foundation of America's first truly unique musical genre, the blues. All right, let's talk about the blues. Blues music, or the blues as it's commonly known, follows an easy to understand musical pattern that can be played on any readily available instrument, even ones that were made at home, which made it more accessible to all people, regardless of socioeconomic status or race. And at a time when Black people were not welcome at the table of American culture, we ended up creating our own, which would eventually dictate music culture in America, even until this day. Jim Crow laws were state and local laws that enforced racial segregation in the southern United States, in effect from the late 1800s until the Civil Rights Act that was passed in 1964. These laws treated African Americans as second-class citizens, preventing them from living in white neighborhoods, attending certain schools that were in white neighborhoods, working the same jobs as their white counterparts, eating at white-owned restaurants, or even using the same restrooms and water fountains as white people. The turmoil that caused daily economic, physical, and emotional struggles caused these laws, and the racism that these laws encouraged provided much of the lyrical inspiration for music that was found in the early blues era. During the time known as the Great Migration, many African Americans left southern United States in hopes of escaping Jim Crow laws and moved north to find work, bringing along their rich musical traditions and spreading the blues from the Mississippi Delta to other regions of the United States like St. Louis, Chicago, Kansas City, and Detroit, inspiring people from all walks of life. And because of its popularity and accessibility, the blues became a major starting point for incredible musicians to give rise to many new fields of music within the blues. Women were an influential part of this development, with several female blues singers driving the movement throughout the United States, but never quite getting the same recognition or celebrated status as the men of the time. All right, so let's start off by talking about Mamie Smith. Mamie Smith is known as America's first lady of the blues. She was the first Black woman to record blues vocals in 1920. The song Crazy Blues, which sold 1 million records in its first 6 months and made record labels aware of the huge market potential for what would then be called race records, paved the way for Ma Rainey, Bessie Smith, and other mavens of the blues that followed. Noted as the mother of the blues, Gertrude Ma Rainey was reportedly born in Alabama in either 1882 or 1886. She began her music career as a teenager performing in minstrel shows and signed a contract with Paramount Records in 1932, where she would record more than 100 songs over a 5-year span. That's insane. To record over 100 songs in 5 years, that's pretty amazing. Throughout her career, Ma Rainey recorded with the likes of Louis Armstrong and became close friends with Bessie Smith and toured with the Georgia Jazz Band until her retirement in 1935. Nicknamed the Empress of the Blues and revered as one of the best vocalists of all time, Bessie Smith was a very popular woman blues singer in the 1920s and the 1930s. At an early age, Bessie began performing on the streets of Chattanooga, Tennessee, and eventually leaving for a better life in 1912 to join a traveling minstrel and vaudeville show as a dancer and a singer with Pa and Ma Rainey. As a teenager, Ma Rainey became Bessie's mentor, and she stayed with the show until 1915. Ma Rainey greatly influenced Bessie's showmanship. However, it was Bessie's elegant contralto voice and her hypnotizing delivery that earned her her own following in the South and along the Eastern Seaboard and inspired countless musicians, including Louis Armstrong, Billie Holiday, and Janis Joplin. The magnitude of blues promoted a certain structural contrast between acoustic and electric music. Lightning Hopkins was an American acoustic blues player and singer from Centralville, Texas. Hopkins grew up in church singing gospel music and later recorded his cousin, electric blues artist Frankie Lee Smith. In the late 1930s, he moved to Houston in an unsuccessful attempt to break into the music scene there. But while singing on Dowling Street in Houston's 3rd Ward, which would eventually become his home, He was discovered by Lola Ann Cullum of Aladdin Records, based in Los Angeles. And he recorded the hit records T Model Blues and Tim Moore's Farm at Sugar Hill Recording Studio in Houston. By the mid-late 1950s, his prodigious output of high-quality recordings had gained him a following among African Americans and blues aficionados alike, and his influence can still be heard in modern music today. All right, so let's talk about some jazz. It's 1915. Jazz was a byproduct of a unique cultural environment found in the city of New Orleans in the early 20th century. More diverse than anywhere else in the South, people of African, French, Haitian, Italian, German, Mexican, Native American, English descent were all interacting with each other on a daily basis, mixing their culture, their food, and their music, thus producing one of America's most distinctive musical styles. So, what exactly is jazz? Well, it's a genre of music in which improvisation is typically a very important part. No one instrument dominates as musicians take turn playing solos that they make up right on the spot, which is super impressive and takes a lot of skill. Jazz musicians take great pride in sharing and performing each other's songs, commonly referred to as jazz standards, and finding their own distinct ways of playing them. So you may hear the same song performed by various musicians, but each will find a way of making the sound different and unique. There are a lot of varieties of styles of jazz, but most are very rhythmic, featuring a beat with a fun forward momentum called a swing, and they use bent or blue notes to expand the emotional expression of the song. There are also a lot of call and response patterns in jazz, where one instrument, voice, or a part of the band answers another. Whatever way it's performed, jazz expresses everything from pain to agony to sheer joy, which made it a powerful instrument for people suffering from oppression because of their skin color, their financial issues, or social class, or for somebody that they loved. All right, let's talk about Lil Harnden Armstrong. As it's true with most art forms and human endeavors, women's accomplishments in jazz have often been dismissed, overlooked, or overshadowed. While many women in the world of 1920s jazz, especially those of color, were constrained to the roles of singer or dancer in a chorus line, Chicago-born Lil Harnden was a respected pianist, composer, arranger, and band leader, and one of the most prominent women in early jazz, making a name for herself long before she was married to the trumpeter, vocalist, composer, actor, famous Louis Armstrong in 1924, who went on to become one of the most influential people in jazz history. I mean, if you see Lil Harnden play the piano, it's one of the most awe-striking things to see, because you see how she commands the entire band, and literally with just her fingers and her bubbly presence, she's able to orchestrate a whole experience that everyone can participate in. That brings us to Louis Armstrong himself. Nicknamed the Great Satchmo, Louis Armstrong is known for his iconic performances and recordings of such songs as
What a Wonderful World
and Hello, Dolly, and West End Blues, which the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame listed as one of the 500 songs that shaped rock and roll. But Satchmo owed as much of his early success to Lil Harden's knowledge and drive to his own talent. Another important contributor to nearly every aspect of jazz is pianist, arranger, and composer Mary Lou Williams. Mary Lou wrote hundreds of compositions and arrangements and recorded more than 100 records during a career that started in the late 1920s and spanned for more than half a century. That's phenomenal. I'm sure most of you are familiar with our next artist, but it wasn't until the 1930s and the 1940s that many women jazz singers and musicians were recognized as successful artists in the music world. Billie Holiday's music rose to fame following the Great Depression, with a unique style that reinvented the conventions of modern singing and performance. Although she never received technical training or learned how to read music, Lady Day, as she was lovingly called, quickly became an iconic voice of the jazz swing era. One night during her epic run at Barney's Josephson's Cafe Society in Manhattan, Lewis Allen, whose real name was Abel Meeropol, a New York public school teacher, contacted the cafe owners asking if Billie would perform a poem that he had written. Her performance of Strange Fruit divided and stunned the audience members to an uncomfortable silence, moving both men and women to openly weep while others angrily walked out. Considered by scholars to be the first protest song of the Civil Rights era, Strange Fruit horrifically visualized the lynching of Black men, women, and children in the Deep South, with lyrics so controversial that Columbia Records, Billie's label, refused to record it. Understanding the cultural impact Strange Fruit would have on American society, Billie left Columbia Records for the independent Commodore Records, where she could record whatever she pleased. And Strange Fruit immediately became a hit and was considered to be the first cry out against racism. It's a lasting piece of American culture.
For the crows to pluck, for the rain to gather, for the wind.
Considered to be one of the world's first Black superstars, singer and actress Ethel Waters was the first Black woman to pioneer Black spaces in white entertainment. Whether it was in the theater or on vaudeville, the Oscar-nominated phenom pushed boundaries of social normalities and paved the way for LGBTQIA+ performers. She was the first Black woman to integrate Broadway, and in 1939, she became the first African American to star in her own television program, The Ethel Waters Show, on NBC. Selling over 40 million albums and winning 13 Grammys in her lifetime, the First Lady of Song, Ella Fitzgerald, was one of the most popular women jazz singers in the United States for over 50 years. Her voice was flexible, wide-ranging, accurate, and ageless, timeless. With her bright tone and clear pronunciation, Ella transcended race, ethnicity, class, and age, delivering lyrics with a sweet, girlish tone that could leap, slide, or growl anywhere in her nearly 3-octave range. So impressive. Some of her amazing hits include All That Jazz, Misty Blue, and Hello Dolly. January 4th, 1936, Billboard magazine published its first music hit parade, a ranked list of the most popular recordings at any given point in time, usually determined by sales or radio play. The first music popularity chart was calculated in July 1940. A variety of song charts followed, which were eventually consolidated into the Hot 100 by mid-1958. Originally, Billboard had separate charts for different measures of popularity, including disc jockey playings, jukebox song selections, and best-selling records in retail stores. But eventually, in 1945, Billboard began ranking the most popular songs by issuing a weekly national survey measuring sales, radio plays, jukebox performances, and other measures. The highest achievement of a successful song that any song could have was a position on the honor roll of hits, which gradually grew to become the Top 100, the predecessor to the current Billboard Hot 100 chart. I got soul and I'm super bad. Did you know that James Brown is known as the godfather of soul? Well, soul music, usually just called soul, became a popular music genre in the United States by the same African American communities throughout the US around 1950 and in the early 1960s. And it combines a lot of the elements of music that we've already talked about: African American gospel music, rhythm and blues, jazz, and spirituals. Well, soul became popular for dancing and listening in the United States when record labels like Motown, Atlantic, and Stax were really influential during the Civil Rights Movement. Soul also became popular all around the world, directly influencing rock music and music in Africa, particularly making something like funk. Funk in West Africa was huge. I remember having one of my dad's old Nigerian funk vinyls, and it was super funky. Lots of different horns and wailing. Fela Kuti is one of the most famous funk singers, and you can definitely hear elements of African American gospel, jazz, a lot of that call and response, and it's really cool. You should definitely check it out. From its earliest days, rock and roll has included a vast array of sounds and influences, drawing heavily from rhythm and blues, swings, Negro spirituals, and gospel. Rock and roll leans heavily into its use of electric guitars and a strong rhythm with youth-oriented lyrics. Prior to the end of World War II, teens had limited freedom, not much economic power, and little influences on decisions being made by the older white generation. A lot of that changed after the war. The economy boomed, and that's why a lot of people from the older generation are referred to as baby boomers. And parents could provide more for their children than what they had. As a result, teens had the ability to make more decisions for themselves and time to have fun and be social and go out and play music. 20 years before Elvis, 10 years before Chuck Berry, Johnny Cash, or Little Richard, Sister Rosetta Tharpe invented rock and roll. I'm gonna let you let that sink in. Yet for many years, she was omitted from its history. Commonly referred to as the original soul sister and the godmother of rock and roll. Pretty epic. Sister Rosetta played the electric guitar like no other. Women guitarists were a rarity in the mid-1930s, and here was one who combined religious and secular themes with lyrics that displayed her openness to living life unapologetically, leaving gospel audiences speechless. Gleeful shrieks, flamboyant fashion, and a gender-bending persona, Little Richard Penniman was the self-proclaimed king and queen of rock and roll. As a young boy, Little Richard was inspired by the gospel music of his local church, and so he learned to play gospel music and gospel piano from a musician named S.Q. Reeder Jr. He went by the stage name Escarita, performing in heavy makeup and a large pompadour wig, which would later become Little Richard's signature look. In 1947, Sister Rosetta Tharpe overheard the then 14-year-old Little Richard singing gospel songs before her show in Mason, Georgia. She invited him to open her performance that night, essentially jump-starting his long career in music. Little Richard wowed crowds and inspired many LGBTQIA+ musicians and performers for years to come, earning him with the title as one of the founding pioneers of rock and roll. I hope you get a chance to see a video of Chuck Berry playing guitar. Chuck Berry combined hillbilly, blues, swing, jazz, and other influences to write songs about teenage life and culture that both black and white teens equally adored. But he was speaking from his perspective as a black man in America. With a string of memorable hits, including classics like Johnny B. Good, Roll Over Beethoven, and Maybelline, Chuck Berry was one of the most popular and influential performers in rock and roll and R&B in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. Skiffle. Skiffle is a subgenre of rock and roll. It was music for the poorest of people who created a jack-of-all-trades musical melting pot with whatever instruments they could lay their hands on, as long as it was cheap. The term skiffle was slang for a rent party, in which people put on a show and charge admission to pay rent on their home. It began as African American jazz, blues, and folk music influences, but was reinterpreted and reimagined by British musicians in the 1950s, paving the way for successful British pop and rock bands like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and Led Zeppelin. Like rock and roll, skiffle's lyrics were driven by teenage rebellion, and this cultural appropriation ended up bringing a lot of black music into the living rooms of people all over the world. Doo-wop, ba-ba, doo-wop. Doo-wop. Doo-wop is the physical embodiment of DIY, do-it-yourself, or DIT, do-it-together spirit. No money, no instruments, no problem. Your voice is the instrument. Your body is the percussion, making it the most accessible form of popular music that you can do any place, anytime, provided you have some friends that will harmonize with you. The term a cappella literally means without instrumental accompaniment. Singers would use nonsensical words to mimic the sounds of instruments, oftentimes replacing the backing band simply with their voices. This was first seen as in bebop, a fast-paced subgenre of jazz, lots of scatting and tooting with your voices. But because the long harmonies and slower ballads used by the crooners and its mass appeal, the term doo-wop became the name of the genre. Doo-wop's musical and social roots point to a long history of vocal harmony in American culture, particularly in African American communities. Doo-wop began in the 1940s, but it developed out of the entertainment, social singing provided by communal spaces such as churches, schools, theaters, bars, and barbershops, which is where the term barbershop quartet comes from. It became a favorite pastime of many, particularly in poor neighborhoods where entertainment was an expensive luxury. Amateur and semi-professionals groups were scouted right off the streets in neighborhoods like Harlem and New York and put into recording studios. The smooth sound of their songs became largely popular with many communities, inspiring lots of young people to imitate the sounds of black doo-wop groups, and by the mid-1950s, doo-wop filled the radio airwaves. On January 12, 1959, Detroit native Berry Gordy Jr. founded Tamla Records, later renaming it Motown Record Corporation, short for Motor City, which is Detroit's nickname. With a loan of $800 he got from his family, he became a songwriter, producer, entrepreneur, and teacher who believed in providing new spaces for artists who were underrepresented in the music industry, primarily due to race. Unfortunately, a lot of his artists were not paid fairly and signed away a lot of the rights to their song to Motown Records, a practice that still happens to artists today. Nevertheless, he was the very first African American to own a record label, and when he opened his famed Hitville, USA office at 2648 West Grand Boulevard in Detroit, he created not only an office for his business, but a 24-hour factory of predominantly black singers, musicians, writers, and producers that churned out a lot of hits. But again, a lot of them were not compensated for the work that they were putting in, and so many artists of the time were taken advantage of by big corporations, but that was just not being aware or having the resources to know as an artist what you need. That's why it's always important, now that we have the internet, do your research. Released in 1959, the song Money, That's What I Want, written by Tamla founder Berry Gordy and Janie Bradford, became the first hit record of Gordy's Motown enterprise. In the 1960s, Motown was marketed as the sound of young America that married stylistic elements of pop, jazz, doo-wop, gospel, and soul music to an uplifting message and upbeat rhythm that became the heartbeat of American pop music. In 1960, the teen girl group The Marvelettes landed the company's first ever #1 pop hit tune with the tune Please Mr. Postman. The label signed 2 more young groups, the Supremes, who used to be known as the Primettes, and the Temptations, and within 3 years, these 2 groups would lead Motown into the mainstream. The Supremes launched an unprecedented string of 5 consecutive #1 hits. That's amazing, starting with Where Did Our Love Go? And other classics like Stop in the Name of Love, and so many others, while the Temptations released their eternal Motown classic like My Girl, My Girl, My Girl, and others like Just My Imagination. I'm getting chills just getting ready to talk about this next artist, simply known by her first name, Aretha. She needs no other introduction, and she is the undisputed queen of soul. Her career would span a remarkable 6 decades, receiving countless of awards and honors. A gifted singer and a talented pianist, Aretha Franklin toured with her father's traveling revival show and later visited New York, where she signed with Columbia Records in 1960. Can you imagine? There's so much music, so much amazing, influential music happening right now in the early 1960s. I can't imagine being alive during that time. Anyway, Franklin went on to release several popular singles, many of which are not only considered classics, but songs of the civil rights movement and anthems for the feminist movement. While many of Aretha's songs she wrote herself, and those rose to #1, she is most remembered for demanding R-E-S-P-E-C-T. And that song was actually written and recorded by the talented Otis Redding, another soul musician who moved into the times of funk and soul and doo-wop and all of these different things. So just like in jazz, these artists would collaborate and play each other's song. Well, Aretha took the song Respect, and which was originally a man demanding this from his partner, his woman, and when he got home from work, but she flipped it and turned the song and the world on its head. The song quickly rose to #1 on the charts, where it stayed there for over 12 weeks. Absolutely amazing. Psychedelic rock and roll. This is the 1960s, and we are experiencing a subgenre of rock and roll. In the 1960s, it became common practice for producers, songwriters, and engineers to freely experiment with musical form, arrangements, unnatural reverb, and other sound effects. Largely inspired by hallucinogens or so-called mind-altering drugs, psychedelic rock sometimes is referred to as psychedelic funk or soul. This emerged in the late 1960s as Black soul musicians began to embrace new production techniques, instrumentations, and effects, like using a wah pedal or a phaser. Its prominence continued on into the 1970s, playing a major role in the development of funk and disco genres. Jimi Hendrix, born John Allen Hendrix, but his father changed his name to Jimmy when he was 3, is widely recognized as one of the most creative and influential musicians of the 20th century. He pioneered the explosive possibilities of electric guitar and stage performance. He began playing guitar for other musicians like Little Richard, the Isley Brothers, and Sam Cooke. But when Jimi Hendrix's debut album, Are You Experienced, was released in 1967, it turned the music world upside down. Hendrix's innovative style of combining fuzz, crackling feedback, and controlled distortion created a new musical form that fused the psychedelic sounds of the late 60s with the classic traditions of rock, blues, and soul music. Because he was unable to read or write music, it's nothing short of remarkable that Jimi Hendrix's meteoric rise in the music world took place in just 4 short years. Let's talk about funk. So funk. Funk is a slang term that is used to positively describe something that has a metaphorical odor of something that's worth noticing. Have you ever heard somebody say, "You smell what I'm cooking"? It's kind of the same thing. Funk is where jazz, soul, and rock and roll all converge. Musically, the terms funk or funky developed in the jazz vernacular in the 1950s as a reference to the passionate performance that reflected the underground jazz nightclub experience and musicianship that was deeply syncopated bass lines, steady drum beats, and highlighted any number of instruments working together, taking turns, and creating a groove, which is a steady rhythmic feeling that's created by the vocals, the interaction with all of the musicians, but most importantly, the rhythm section, the driving force of any song or any band. So funk originated in the 1960s when musicians would create a rhythmic, danceable new form that combined soul, jazz, and R&B. And not only was James Brown known as the godfather of soul, but as he moved into the 1960s, he became known as the godfather of funk. Rightfully so. He created a collective of phenomenal musicians who let him take the lead and really create an experience where everybody would shine, but everyone was so cohesive. And their music was a driving force during the civil rights movement. Pretty soon after Martin Luther King was assassinated in the 1960s, Brown released his hit single, "Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud." And that became a big wave during the civil rights movement and got a lot of people mobilized to want to really help affect the same change that Brown and other musicians during the time talked about. Like Sly and the Family Stone, for example. They were almost the happy sunshine counterpart to James Brown and his messages. So Sly and the Family Stone, they brought a factor of unification to the funk scene where their, sing-along songs and their super hippie approach to their music appealed to all kinds of people. So it ended up bringing a lot of people together at their shows, and that's how they saw themselves as well. They saw themselves as not black or white. They saw themselves as a band, and they really influenced people to see each other in the same way. In the 1970s, a small army of female funk rock performers that included Chaka Khan, Betty Davis, Patti LaBelle, Mother's Finest, Parlay, and Tina Marie, and other funky divas delighted in pushing the envelope for what was orally pleasing at the time. And as cultural critic Cheryl Keyes explains in her essay, she was too black for rock and too hard for soul. Rediscovering the musical career of Betty Mabry Davis is pretty amazing. If you try to find video or really any subject matter on Betty Davis, it's really hard to find her music, which is unbelievable, because if you see the imagery and just the unapologetically, herself attitude that she carried, this bad attitude that she carried, you would think that she would be way more popular. But most of the scholarship around funk has focused on the cultural work of men at the time. And she states that Betty Davis is an artist whose name has gone unheralded as a pioneer in the annals of funk and rock. Most of these writings on these musical genres have traditionally placed male artists like Jimi Hendrix, George Clinton from Parliament Funkadelic, all hail, and bassist Larry Graham as trendsetters in shaping the rock music sensibility that came with soul, jazz, and early rock and roll. And those artists deserve their accolades for sure, but I mean, go online and try to see if you can find some Betty Davis, and her stuff is amazing, and just the way that she used her voice, how she would sink into her lyrics and really growl and drive those lyrics home. Yeah, I think that she definitely deserves a huger platform than she's gotten. So if you get a chance, definitely go check out some Betty Davis. So created in the 1970s in the Bronx in New York, hip hop originally started as, communities coming together, people coming together for cookouts and just hanging out, and they'd have a boombox. And so there would be music playing on the boombox, and during the instrumental part, someone would start rhyming over it. There aren't recorded songs of the original or the first people who started rhyming over words, but in 1979, a band called the Sugar Hill Gang created a song which I'm sure a lot of you have heard. I'm going to play it right now.
To the hip hop, the hip it to the hip hop, you don't stop the rocker to the bang bang boogie. Say up.
You know that song? Bum, bum, bum. And if you listen to it, you can kind of hear elements of funk. You have that really groovy bass line. You have a steady drum beat, and the vocals are not what we consider hip hop today. It's been an evolution, but the vocals you hear now actually step in that same groove with the bass, very much like a funk song, just maybe a little bit sped up and not as spaced out. So rap and hip hop kind of started to move as the music moved through the generations. And so you had other people come just a few years later, like Grandmaster Flash, who also created some really awesome timeless pieces that we've heard. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit to Grandmaster Flash, and then we're going to listen to that song. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with that one. Don't push me, 'cause I'm close to the edge.
I'm trying not to lose my head. See what?
So you can kind of hear the different elements, and now as technology is also starting to evolve, and as we talked about in psych rock, people are using phasers and wah pedals. Well, DJs during the mid to late 70s started incorporating sample loops and drum machines into their DJ equipment. So you started to be able to get and program these really cool tones and sounds and then loop them, which made it even easier to rhyme over. One of the first prominently recorded female rappers of the hip hop movement was MC Sha Rock. She's known as the mother of the mic and was the first female MC rapper noted in hip hop culture. She was the first artist that was on wax, that's also known as being put on vinyl. Sharon Green, that's her real name, was a B-girl. She began as a B-girl or a break dancer in her earliest days living in the South Bronx in that hip-hop scene in 1970. I can only imagine what that was like before joining Funky Plus 4, which was composed of her, DJ Jazzy Jeff, DJ Breakout, Guy Williams, Keith, and they were the four and she was the plus one. Their first significant hits were singles like Rapping and Rocking the House, and that was recorded on Sugar Hill Records. Remember, we talked about Sugar Hill Gang just a second ago in 1979, and they also recorded That's the Joint in 1980. They are known as one of the 50 greatest rap groups of all time. And in 1981, they performed on Saturday Night Live, who was hosted by Debbie Harry of Blondie. And they became the very first hip-hop group to appear on national television. That is huge. As an early pioneer affiliated with the Zulu Nation, MC Shaw Rock inspired a style of rapping that emulated Run DMC, which a lot of us are familiar with. We still wear their shirts, called the Echo Chamber. And you can still hear that influence in so much music today. We're going to round out our time talking about modern music. So that's basically 1980 to present day. And if you think about it, there's so much music that has been influential in rock, R&B, soul, which is now also known as neo soul, jazz. Oh man, there's so much music, and some of the music that I grew up with has absolutely influenced me and my singing style as a musician today. So first off, we're going to talk about Whitney Houston, and the word influential might just be too weak to describe the impact that Whitney has had over modern music, and I'm sure this is for centuries to come. Building on the gospel foundation she was given by her mother, Cissy Houston, and her godmother, Aretha Franklin, and cousin Dionne Warwick. So already you hear this powerhouse of women who have absolutely phenomenal voices behind Whitney, giving her these influences over time and really shaping her song style. Houston defined the dramatically emotive melismas, which are those quick up and down runs that we know Mariah Carey so famously for, Ariana Grande so famously for, Beyonce so famously for. Whitney was the pioneer of the run, with her pop and R&B style and a voice that had unmatched power. Whitney was cited as the most awarded female artist of all time in the Guinness Book of World Records, and is one of the best-selling recording artists of all time, with an estimated sale of over 200 million records worldwide. All hail. I feel really lucky to have grown up with all of these women that I'm about to talk about, as an influence for me musically. Even as a kid, I remember seeing Whitney Houston on the television. I remember seeing Mariah Carey on the television, and that's who we're talking about next. Mariah Carey has set so many precedences when it comes to being a performer. She is known as the best-selling female performer of all time, who rose to superstardom on the strength of her stunning 5-octave voice. I don't know if you've ever heard Mariah Carey hit that high that you've tried and I've tried, but we both know that Mariah and maybe Amela Rowe are probably the only people that are gonna hit that note. Her debut album was released in 1990, earning all comparisons to Whitney Houston and Celine Dion, who also all hail. And both of them did Everybody One Better by co-writing almost all of her own material from the start. She achieved worldwide success with the follow-up album Music Box, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard her Christmas album, Merry Christmas, and then Daydream. There's so many hits that we still sing today that people sample of Mariah Carey's music. And these albums spawned from some of Carey's most successful singles. You remember There's a Hero and Without You and All I Want for Christmas Is You. Fantasy, Always Be My Baby. Just so many in the in that pop and R&B world that were used in movies and really permeated the culture and kind of set the trend for what we now see today as pop and R&B. So to round out our talk of the progression of Black music in America, the history of Black music, we've only scratched the surface. There's so much more music out there. There's so much more history out there. Check out some documentaries on YouTube. You can find a slew of history on the different genres and subgenres of music in America. But our last artist that we're talking about is the queen herself, Queen Beyonce. And when asked about her influences, Beyonce stated that she grew up listening to Mariah Carey. She's my number one. She taught me how to sing. She was the first person I ever listened to in my life. And that can be said for so many of these powerhouse mavens in the R&B scene. Beyonce listened to Mariah Carey. Mariah Carey listened to and emulated Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston emulated and was molded by Aretha, and so on and so forth. And you see this beautiful progression of powerful and influential women really giving a gift to the next generation to kind of progress and really proliferate the sound and the soul that has taken decades to really form and mold. So Beyonce, known as Queen Bee, but her full name is Beyonce Giselle Knowles Carter. She's an American singer, songwriter, record producer, dancer, actress, mother, all around amazing person who was born and raised in Houston, Texas, is where I'm from. And Beyonce has performed in various singing and dancing competitions when she was a child. I remember seeing clips of her on the Ed Sullivan Show, on Talent Search. But she rose to fame in the late 1990s as the lead singer of Destiny's Child, Bills, 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 being one of the best-selling girl groups of all time. And I think every generation deserves an artist that's not afraid to push boundaries, to experiment, to reach back into the past, and to listen and observe history behind the melodies that make us think, sing, dance, cry, and consider our impact on the future. And I think Beyonce does that so well. She's already so prolific, and not even being, in her mid-40s, and she's already created such a body of work that has transmuted the human experience through emotions, through pain, through different situations that you just happen to find yourself in, regardless of what you look like, where you grew up, what gender you identify with. These are songs that really permeate the experience of being human. And I think that's what makes her so personable as a celebrity, is that she really does take her artistry to the next level by bringing you into her experience. So we've covered a lot of music today, a lot of history today, from spirituals to jazz to blues, rock and roll, psych rock, soul, funk, hip hop, R&B. All of these are a progression of the Black experience in the United States and across the world, as these influences interweaved between themselves and into other cultures that ended up being shared and became mainstream. I hope you guys enjoyed what we did today, and I hope it challenges you to go out and do some more research, find some more music, look for those underground artists that didn't get the same spotlight that the people we talked about today did. And I will see you next time, Camp Rockarama. Bye.
We at GRA always want to lift up the voices of unheard and marginalized groups beyond the scope of their own communities, which is why our next workshop, Their Story, Trans and Queer Music Through History, is so important. So let's celebrate some of the accomplishments made by queer artists and musicians through history as Fern Rojas and Danny Cleveland lead us on this informative and inspiring journey.
Hey campers, my name is Danny Cleveland. I am a musician. I play the guitar and I'm a lifelong music nerd.
Hey y'all, my name is Fern. I'm a queer and trans musician. I play cello, guitar, bass, keys, and I'm really excited to get to talk to y'all today about this. So these days, it's really easy to find openly queer and trans musicians. You might know names like Janelle Monáe, Big Freedia, Azalea Banks, Sophie, Haley Kiyoko, and Laura Jane Grace, who are active in the LGBTQ community. Uh, and when studying history, the people you learn about are not really often identified as being queer or trans, and this applies to music history as well. This doesn't mean that there haven't always been queer and trans musicians or people making history. It's just that for one reason or another, that part or the entirety of their identity has been hidden or left out. Uh, the reality is, as long as there has been music, there have been queer and trans people making music. So we're gonna talk about a few of them today. I'm gonna start off with Ma Rainey. So Ma Rainey was born in Georgia in 1886, and she's often called the mother of the blues. Started performing in her early teens with a traveling minstrel show. She took her stage name after being married to Will Pa Rainey, and started singing the blues after performing and traveling throughout the South. Her shows became very popular, and she was offered a record deal by Paramount. She would go on to record over 100 records over the next 5 years, which, geez, that's
That's a lot.
ridiculous.
That's a whole lot.
And sprinkled throughout those records were lyrics that would openly reference her bisexuality, which was pretty much completely unheard of to do at the time. That was a radical move, and I applaud her for that. I really admire her bravery. You know, this was done before the civil rights movement. You know, before a lot of progress was made socially, and despite all that, she still sang about it unapologetically. So that's a huge inspiration to me. Do you have one?
Yeah. One of my inspirations has always been kind of continuing on the blues trend is Sister Rosetta Tharpe. She is considered the godmother of rock and roll, and she created a lot of the different guitar sounds that people associate with rock and roll music. She started out as a gospel and church performer, long time performer, and had a electric guitar up in the church much earlier than a lot of people were playing that style of guitar. And that allowed her to move into other areas and opened other doors for her. She ended up making one of the records that's now considered one of the very first rock and roll records, way before Chuck Berry or Elvis or any of those things. It was Sister Rosetta Tharpe. And she, this record that she built was one that was on the gospel charts, and she made the jump from gospel over into the R&B charts. Sort of like some musicians will make the jump from country to a rap chart or whatever that might be these days. That was one of the very first times that happened. So that really brought this first wave of rock and roll to be, with Elvis hearing her, Chuck Berry, and Johnny Cash. She ended up having a second wave as a comeback tour. She went on a blues tour in England, in Manchester, and she performed on a train station platform. And that was broadcast across Manchester. And right before it started, she noticed that it was going to rain. And so she came up to the band leader and said, "Hey, we're going to change our opening song. Get ready, we're going on stage right now, and we're playing this song. It's called Didn't It Rain?" And that was broadcast across England and ended up being an inspiration to other musicians out there that went on to become Led Zeppelin, that went on to become the Rolling Stones, and all of these second wave English musicians. I want to show a couple of things right quick on Sister Rosetta. I can remember how to share screen, so bear with me here.
Wow. So, do you also have do you have a bit of Ma Rainey to play as well
Yeah.
after that? Awesome. That would be totally forgot about that.
We're just going. It's fine.
Yeah.
Let me share here. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
All right. So the first picture I'm showing here is actually a picture of Celise, who played with Lizzo and did a SNL special with Lizzo. And if you notice, she's playing a very iconic white Gibson SG. It has this big overcoat on. What she's doing is doing this homage to Sister Rosetta Tharpe. And this is what Sister Rosetta Tharpe played in that Manchester performance. She's playing this white Gibson SG, and it just really nails the performance here. Here's a little bit of that. Here. Let me know if you can't hit.
Didn't it, you know it did, I didn't it? Oh my Lord, how it rained.
I like that.
Man.
She is a great performer. Like she just
Yes.
will tear it down. Tear it down.
Tear it down, tear it up, tear it sideways,
Yeah.
all over the place.
Yeah. Let me play a little Ma Rainey though too. To your point on having even some earlier ones here. Playlist here. I'll move it forward just a bit.
They don't mean me no good. I run away tomorrow. They don't mean me no good. I'm gonna run away, have to leave this neighborhood.
Pause out there. Some of those very early blues.
Beautiful.
She was actually, Ma Rainey was a mentor for Bessie Smith, who was also bisexual.
Oh.
It also had some of these lyrics that were sort of played with the idea of being bisexual, but not coming out and saying it. So like this one here, that's "Tain't nobody's business if I do," and Lore is saying that, oh, like this was Bessie kind of pushing on the boundaries a little bit here.
That's awesome. And that's one of the things that I think is, part of why it's so important to learn about these people. I think having, a mentor figure like that in your life can make a huge difference. I mean, I know it did for me, for sure, growing up, listen to different queer and trans artists. I think there's a lot to connect with, and to give you kind of the, inspiration or strength or courage to, to be yourself unapologetically.
Yeah. I know for me, it was, so I grew up in a town that was 1,000 people. There was 76 kids in my grade. All of which did not graduate. We ended up with 70 who graduated.
Oh.
So not too bad, right? But it was, it was really small. And I knew when I was a kid that like I was different because I was super into music. Like all day, every day, that's all I wanted to do. And so we would go to the library and you could check out CDs and tapes from the library back then. And so I'd check out like the limit of how many I could get. And once I got to be like in 6th or 7th grade, I started realizing like, oh, I'm really different. than the people around me. I feel a lot differently than other people. And it was through checking out CDs that I found artists first that were identified as lesbian, like Alyssa Etheridge and Tracy Chapman, and then later started finding more trans artists that I identified even more with. And those were really, in that town, there weren't a lot of people there that I could connect with. So the music became my friends and the things that I could turn to when stuff really got me down, or if I needed to feel a little bit more empowered, right?
That's awesome.
You gotta watch it, Bird. I'll just talk and talk.
I know. Oh no. I was mesmerized just now. I love it.
Yeah.
So I think I want to talk about a little bit about Wendy Carlos. So she was a pioneer in electronic music, and she helped develop the tools that we use to create electronic music. So at a young age, she was interested in music and electronics. She wrote her first composition at age 10, which is amazing after only starting to play piano like at 6. And she won a scholarship while she was in high school by building a computer, which that is, I can't even do that today. And I think, we have a lot.
Yeah.
At
the time it would have been what, like
it would have been huge.
60s, 70s, like
in the 60s, yeah,
really,
in
really...
the early 60s, yeah. So that just blew my mind when I learned that. So she ended up attending Columbia. She's working on her master's degree, where she partnered up with Robert Moog, and she would be instrumental in the development of the first synthesizers. So in 1967, she began transitioning, but she kept her gender identity secret to the public for the next 12 years because of the fear that it would hurt her career, and any the backlash that she would receive. So, but in the following years, despite that, she was very successful. She released the first classical music album to go platinum, which I don't even know if there's been another one since then that has gone platinum.
That's something that happens, right?
That's not, yeah, but she made it happen. She won 3 Grammys. She produced several albums of her own work, and she worked on several film scores, including working with Stanley Kubrick. So, yeah, she was very prolific and very successful, but keeping her true gender identity secret was really taking a toll on her. And in 1979, she came out publicly as a trans woman. And guess what happened? She just continued to have a wildly successful career because she's awesome.
yeah. I was about to say, I feel like Tron was a little later. I feel like she...
Yeah, Tron was after that. The Shining was after that. And she's still making music to this day. She's still, pioneering. She's still just doing her thing, and she's also an avid photographer of solar eclipses. I learned as well, which is neat.
Yeah. That's, I guess, kind of goes in the same theme of really loving engineering things and precise, right? That takes a lot of focus to do.
It would be like the most amazing thing to experience, like if Wendy Carlos scored a solar eclipse. Like if you could witness a solar eclipse to the music that she makes to it.
You should write her.
Oh yes. Can we make this a thing? I'll do a Kickstarter.
Yeah, go. If any of the campers would love to help us in reaching out to Wendy Carlos,
let's do it. Let's start a campaign. Hashtag Wendy scores the eclipse.
Yeah, there you go. Here, let me. I pulled up a few of her songs here on Spotify right quick for us to listen to as well. I grabbed the Tron soundtrack, which I actually listen to the Tron soundtrack at work. This is one of the things that helps me focus because it's really precise.
I love that. Yeah.
we'll skip The Shining. We're here for the theme for Tron. Okay, I'm gonna stop it here because
Right.
I'm gonna feel like I need to go and like write emails for work because I'm
Yeah.
listening to.
It's so cool how, in that recording, she treated the synthesizer as like as just a symphony, like all the instruments in a symphony all in one box, and managed to, like, that music has such a symphonic quality to it, and but some of her stuff also just like really pushes the limits of
Yeah,
what an instrument is and what music is, and
yeah.
just like she pioneered ambient music, which
I didn't know that. That's a
yeah,
learning for me.
yeah, that was
I didn't realize that. That's awesome.
yeah. So she's awesome.
I'm gonna go and learn more about Wendy Carlos now. I can tell you that much. To go on with the sort of gender variant and also sort of pushing the boundaries of what we can do in music, I want to take us to Frank. Had you been a Frank fan before, Fern?
You
Frank
know,
Fern is hard to say.
I actually just learned about Frank when I started working with you. So, but I'm
Yeah.
glad I did.
So
New
Frank
fan in Frank.
is very interesting individual. I listened to Frank when I was younger. They did a record in 1995 called Goofy Foot that was with a bunch of other queer musicians. And that's the one that I knew about. It was, she sang some songs that were like over a ukulele or over folk, and kind of pushed on traditional themes. There's a song on there called Mrs. Brown, You Have a Lovely Daughter. And as a young person who's just figuring out their queer identity, that felt like really, really pushing the boundaries of like, oh, I'm listening to the song and there's a woman singing it, right? And that Frank also was a very prolific Tupperware salesperson. Like, was
Really?
one of the top sellers back when you would have Tupperware parties and people would come to your house and look at the plastic containers and then you'd sell them the Tupperware.
I see. So I would love to have gone to a Frank Tupperware party.
I
That
know,
sounds
right? Like, that sounds great. Yeah. But what I learned sort of doing this that I didn't know about, I thought of Frank, for this workshop. I learned that they also had some early starts in a punk band in 1978. So they first went out to California because they were getting into the folk scene and got really tired of that scene. So moved over to the punk rock scene. And the LA band that they ended up being in was called Nervous Gender. And they, along with one other band, were one of the first bands that plugged their synthesizers and keyboards into distortion in the punk scene. So they're sort of like the pilgrims or pioneers of pushing the boundary of what could be in that type of music. Because up until that point, it was really like a lot of guitar and bass and that type of thing. And then they also really pushed the boundary on the types of lyrics that they were saying. So they also had these very queer and open lyrics in punk rock, which was not something that was happening in front of people on stages at that point. So I really loved finding out that Frank had this punk rock background to them because I didn't know, and I'm a big Riot Girl and punk fan, and Frank was one of the pioneers there, which I didn't realize.
wow. Yeah, that's awesome.
I don't have a clip from Nervous Gender, as in
Okay.
all like 1978 bands. One, any recordings that I find are terrible, and two, there's just not a lot, right? Like, because it was
No,
very
yeah.
much like, we're just gonna do it, and if somebody finds us, that's great. So
Yeah, you gotta be in the know to know,
yeah.
kind of situation. So I want to talk about June Millington as well. It's around same time after. So June Millington is from the Philippines. She moved to California in 1961 as a child, and faced a lot of adversity for being biracial and growing up in a bicultural family. So there was she felt very out of place. She would say in school a lot. There was a lot of bullying that would go on, a lot of loneliness, and she turned to music to find solace from that. And through music, after performing at a talent show at school on the ukulele with her sister, she started making a bunch of friends because everybody loved her music and thought it was awesome. So June and her sister would go on to form a band called the Svelts, um, which was pretty popular with the kids. They would play a bunch of R&B and Motown kind of music, but really really speed it up and give it some extra energy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they brought the Sister Rosetta to the
exactly. And then Fanny was their next project, which was the first all-female rock band to release an album with a major record label. So yeah, they would eventually be a huge influence on bands like the Go-Go's and the Runaways. And June Millington finally left Fanny in 1973, and since then she's been involved in the women's music movement. She started a record label. She's worked on several documentaries and had a successful career playing music, mostly with her sister. Um, and she formed the Institute for the Musical Arts, which is a nonprofit benefiting women and girls in music. They have a program similar to what we're doing here with Girls Rock, and overall, she's just been a huge advocate for LGBTQ rights. So I think that's really awesome.
So I knew had found Fanny at some point in time over my life, but I didn't realize all the background here.
Yeah, and a thing that she mentions is that she was openly lesbian in the band, but she appreciated that it wasn't what people focused on whenever it didn't become like a selling point for them, and so that's great that worked out that way for her.
Let me play a little clip here. This is where Danny has too many windows open and has to find the window again. So we get share here. Play a little bit. Ain't That Peculiar. I think this is that album, that first album you referenced here. Bump it just a bit so we get into it. Slide. Oh man, I love that. It's
so
like,
good.
so shiny and happy. I love it. I love it. Cool. I want to take us to another trans individual, Wilmer Broadnax. I I actually found out about Wilmer when I was older, and as I started to go on my own transition, which was really only maybe 4 years ago now. So they were somebody that I found on the internet and felt really, really good to connect myself with someone that was further back. So Wilmer was born in Texas, in Houston, in 1916. And in the 1930s and 40s, Wilmer toured with his brother, William, and they were called the Little Axe and the Big Axe. And Wilmer was a really high tenor sound, and they sang in these gospel groups. They sang in like really big gospel groups over the time, but were as part of that quartet feel. They had their own called the Golden Echoes, and then Wilmer ended up being a part of the Five Blind Boys of Alabama or Mississippi, depending on which era we're in, as well as the Spirit of Memphis Quartet. And all of these were groups that had numerous records and were really prominent in the gospel areas. But it wasn't until Wilmer died that the gospel community realized that Wilmer had been assigned female at birth. And so there's all of these records out there where people have assumed, Wilmer was born male at birth, and he spent his whole life in this community presenting as male. And it was not until much later that folks realized that they were a trans or an intersex individual. There's not a lot of history, so we're not sure what Wilmer would have identified themselves as, except for as he. But I found that really interesting and found it inspiring that they felt so strongly to be themselves, even in a time that was probably not super friendly to them.
Yeah, that's brave. That's awesome.
Yeah. I couldn't find the exact clips that I wanted on Spotify, so I'll do a little bit of digging between when we're recording this and then when we put the Spotify playlist out for the campers to be able to see. So you'll get a clip of Wilmer either singing with the Blind Boys of Alabama or when they were in the Spirit of Memphis Quartet.
Nice. Yeah. And yeah, by the way, this playlist is going to be sick. It's going to be so cool.
Yeah.
So definitely check that out.
Yeah.
So I want to do a bit of a throwback all the way to 1858 with
call that a throwback? That's like a full out.
Yeah,
I don't know sports balls metaphors that I could throw in here, but like really far throw.
It's a slam dunk goal, field goal.
Hole in one. Yeah.
Yes.
We're musicians. It's not.
We can only count to 4, anyways. Like
yes.
So,
but I can do that in 3/4 time.
Polyrhythms. No. Anyways, yeah. So Ethel Smythe, she was a composer and a champion of women's rights. She, her father was really opposed to her studying music, but she defied him and did it anyway. She was like, "I don't care, Dad. I'm gonna study music." So she studied at Leipzig Conservatory, where she would receive encouragement from her peers, some of whom included Tchaikovsky, Dvorak, and Brahms. So,
those are really major throwback names to throw out there.
Yeah, but these are the people that she was studying with, and they admired her work, and I think that's huge. That's awesome. She went on to write operas, symphonies, choral arrangements, chamber music, and she was credited with making operas popular in England at the time. So hugely influential. She was highly critiqued. I think her music was scrutinized a lot more. She was considered a woman composer, and so uh, a lot of her more delicate melodies were, were kind of written off as being, not musical enough, or just too feminine. And then whenever she made very, powerful, assertive music, it wasn't ladylike of her to do so, apparently, according to the critics. So,
So themes that continued well into our century.
right. Yeah, I can. Oh, don't even get me started. Anyways, so she took time off of composing to join the Women's Social and Political Union, and she was very active. She was a very active protester, and she was, in fact, imprisoned for 2 months for participating in a protest, along with 100 other members of the Women's Social and Political Union. So that was, not cool,
awesome.
obviously. And so
awesome that she was protesting.
Right. Awesome that she was
Yes.
protesting. Afterwards, she just was so inspired by that experience that she composed the March of Women, which became the anthem for England's women's movement. And she finally retired after that. She wrote several autobiographies, and during, like in the autobiography, she was completely open about, her lesbianism. She was open about it, while she was a composer early in her life. She was just all around very, very free and an advocate for women's rights. And I think that was pretty huge in the 1800s. I think. Yeah.
I'm looking for this March of Women. I had pulled up a clip. I want to grab. It's just started singing in my ears. So just a second here, as I go a little bit off script, as if the rest of this was all on script.
Yeah. It's all totally intentional.
Yes. Well, let me play a little bit of this. I have not played this before, so I don't know what it's going to sound like. So let's hear this March of Women. A throwback.
Ye who have dared, first in the battle to strive and sorrow, scorn, spend, not have ye cared, raising your eyes to a wider morrow, ways that are weary, days that are dreary, toil and pain, my faith ye have borne. Hail, hail, victors is done, wearing the wreath that the brave have worn.
Wow, that's not what I expected that to be, but that's amazing.
Yeah, beautiful stuff.
Yeah. I think I caught the words sorrow and morrow out of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Comrades, ye who have dared, first in the battle to strive and sorrow, scorned, spurned, not have ye cared, raising your eyes to a wider morrow, is the line. And
that's,
man, she just spitting these rhymes.
Yeah.
Like dimes. I mean, I couldn't.
Yeah, it's really inspiring to know that there were people even in the 1800s who were pushing these boundaries and who were so clearly open and ready to protest and to fight for the things that they believed would make society better.
Right, yeah, and doing it so just openly. There wasn't any beating around the bush in these works. It was just loud and proud.
Yeah,
which is awesome.
I feel like that's a great place for us to wrap up here. I want to wrap here on Ethel and this March of Women. I hope that we imparted to you the idea that there's so many musicians that are here, but there's also this whole history of musicians who have been standing here. And if you want to feel closer to that, either as yourself or as an ally, then there's so much wealth of music history for you to pull from and to listen to.
Yeah. And we wouldn't be here, without them making those first steps and being these pioneers. So
yeah.
There's so much to learn from them, and if you have any questions or any want any recommendations for resources or literature, you can post and ask that. I'm super down to give some recommendations.
Absolutely. We'll also have lots of recommendations in our playlist that we'll share too. I'll add some that were a little bit further, a little later than Ethel. There's some from my own history to add there, along with some of the things that you saw in the workbook. I hope you enjoy the time and have a great rest of camp.
Yeah.
All right. See you, kids.
Bye.
What's up, y'all? We are New Fame. That's it. Girls rock ATX. I heard this was a lunchtime performance. Indeed. Happy lunch. We are New Fame. Oh, super grateful to be here. I mean, we're home, but with you guys right now. Hey. Check it out, y'all. We firmly believe that it is your duty to give back with the gifts that you have. It's important, y'all. Give. Give to someone you had never met before. Give to someone you love. Just give. Roll it up. Ooh, I don't like to lose. Pick and choose my battles and my moves. No excuse. And John like a bruise. Block them out like a fool. He's a real what she do. Block him on the left, yo. Block him on the right. Feel like life is a kung fu fight. Yeah, slow down, get the day, nothing worth it. If you wait, then give it right. Oh, block him on the left, yo. Block him on the right. Feel like life is a kung fu fight. Yeah, slow it down, get the day, nothing worth it. If you wait, then give it right. Block him on the left, yo. Block him on the right. Feel like life is a kung fu fight. Slow it down, get the day, nothing worth it. If you wait, then give it right. Block him on the left, yo. Block him on the right. Feel like life is a kung fu fight. Slow it down, get the day, nothing worth it. If you wait, then give it right. Girls rock KTX, make some noise right now wherever you are. Are you in your living room? Are you on the road somewhere? I don't know where you are. We are the same. Nice to meet you. Our love to you. And our home to you. Yo, we're gonna be in Texas July 14th to the 18th, all over Austin included. Forward to it. On Thursday, the 15th. Yeah, Empire. Go on. We love Texas. We miss Texas, y'all. Walking with purpose. My time perfect. I am always worth it. Move like typhoon circuit. Walking with purpose. My time perfect. I am always worth it. Move like typhoon circuit. It's holy. How people gather around and get to know me. Everything I go through has grown me up. Don't believe in luck for a leaf blower. You can never be too short. I need no one to cure. Always wanting more. I need it all on the floor. Ooh, always got what I need. Enough to share with me. Believe it before I see. Yeah, walking with purpose. My time perfect. Perfect. I ain't always worth it. Move like typhoon circuit. Walking with purpose. My time perfect. I ain't always worth it. Move like typhoon circuit. I didn't lie and never get tired. Thoughts for higher. Back drift picture. That's fire. On your runner. Up beside us. 6 times come. Tight like zip tie. Never met a person that I won't find. Feel like God. I won't hide. Talk myself down to 5. Discipline mind. Take your mind like. 60 describe me. GTO. My whole world, my home. I don't even like codes. Every moment I choose, I own it. My moves, my shit calling. They talking. I be touring. Feel it's loud. Always roaring. All my game, I'm always soaring. God said we're choosing. No choosing to run. Alpha, Omega, go there like the sun. Light up another and pass it around. Light up each other. The best is yet to come. Watch I'm perfect, y'all. I'm always worth it. Worth it. Move like typhoon circuit. Walking on purpose. My time perfect. My time. I'm always worth it. Move like typhoon circuit. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Let's go. Yeah. Oh, big up Texas. So much love. What's up, y'all? Hi. I want to like high five. Say something, but I don't get to see your faces this time. She gets me. We gon' take it to the backseat. After I left on the next year, them texts from her arrest me. Kisses all down my neck, red light flex. No one knows what's next. Surely I'll do my best. Big breath, no prejudice, no test. Emergency broadcast, inhale bless. Midnight sex, if you want it, break with it, enable. Anything on running. I like to take with the baby. I like to be in my baby. I like you all to be down. Even if the sky falls to the ground, to the ground. If you want it, ready with it, enable. Yeah, you know I'm rolling steady. I like my steak with the gravy. I like you being my baby. I like you holding me down. Even if the sky falls to the ground, to the ground. Hey. No free. Yeah. Fine like wine, she said. Just get it dying. Just let it wine. You're doing it right. Every part of me wants to climb. I'll be inspiring. Rhythm and right. Ready? Yeah, you know I'm running steady. I like to stick with the gravy. I like you being my baby. I like you holding me down. Even if the sky falls. If you want it, ready, willing, and able, get it. You know I'm rolling steady. I like my steak with the gravy. I like you being my baby. I like you holding me down, even if the sky falls to the ground, to the ground. Hey, I am finding my way, taking you to the grave. Sweet to sour the taste, sweet to sour the taste. Yeah, oh yeah, we going far. All we gotta do is look to the stars. Yeah, anything she wants, yeah, she gets it's true. Anything she wants, yeah, she gets it's true. If you want it, ready, with it, and look at it, you know I'm running. I like to stick with the baby. I like you being my baby. I like you holding me down, even if the sky falls to the ground. If you want it, ready, with it, and they gon' get it. You know I'm rolling steady. I like my stick with the gravy. I like you being my baby. I like you holding me down, even if the sky falls to the ground, to the ground. Hey, yo, that was fun. Have you ever had this much fun in your living room? We're getting used to it, right? Like, don't get too used to it, though.
Yeah, no. We're ending the live stream.
It's nice to
thing.
see faces
But,
again and stuff, you know.
Oh, hey, yeah. We're all over Spotify, ladies and gentlemen. All over all the places. Hi, little baby, let me whisper in your ear. Let me make it clear right here, right here. Not a magic bit of basic, watch me go to distance. Hey, I know resistance. Hey, I ain't playing no games. Never waste a moment of my time.
Don't do it.
Question everything, nothing's given.
You should prove it.
Walking through, I'm custom made. Yeah, that's a movement. Now show me what you're working with. Come on, let's do it. Cause I push impossible. I'm unstoppable. I'll probably see less obstacles. The opposition says these eyes is blurry. I need body focus. Really weird, I'm blinded, so it's my fault.
Blah, 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 blah.
Roll along, sing a song, wear it proud. If I'm wrong, blow smoke, fire gone, stronger than Lion John. King Kong, keep my chest saber. Always on, back and forth, ping pong, so good.
Hit you with that phone. Wherever we go, everybody wanna tune on. We be the name on your lips, good promo. You ask around, it's going down. They break you down. Hit you with that phone. Wherever we go, everybody wanna tune on. We be the name on your lips, good promo. You ask around, it's going down. They break you down. I'm turning back into fact, we all in this. I'm trying to stack in a bag and mind my business. Shouting out of the new city with the quickness. We rock a show that disappear like magic. Bad habits have me smoking on the cabbage. I took my shit off, help me reverse the damage. They had to understand, don't speak the language. We went from slim pickings to a banquet. Time to eat fat carbs, protein. Who smells the feet? Oh no, not me. Big like giant 5 me. Now rubber eyes directing me. Can't go wrong with Cheech and Chong. Standing on feet, we smooth like Mike Jackson. We swerve on them like we action. You know we guarantee satisfaction. I know what they want. It's been coming for so long. Know what they want. It's been coming for so long. Hit you with that phone. Wherever we go, everybody wants it. Hit you with that name and the next good promo. You ask around, it's going down. You ready to go? Hit you with that phone. Wherever we go, everybody wanna tune on. We be that name and the next good promo. You ask around, it's going down. You ready to go?
You don't wanna miss this, you should come and kiss this ring. Ooh. You don't wanna miss this, you should come and kiss this. You should come and kiss this.
You should.
You don't wanna miss this, you should come and kiss this.
You don't wanna miss this, you should come and kiss this.
You don't wanna miss this, you should come and kiss this. You don't wanna miss this, you should come and kiss
Hit you with that
this.
phone. Wherever we go, everybody wanna tune. We be that name on your name, street promo. Yo, ask around, it's going down. They raise you down. Hit you with that phone. Wherever we go, everybody wanna tune. We be that name on your name, street promo. Yo, ask around, it's going down. They raise you down.
Woo! Jump up and down, make some noise, scream. High five your friend.
Crowd surf.
Call a friend. Tell him you just watched me. If you want to.
Hey.
Or I guess just, I don't know, do nothing.
Yo, do what you want, most importantly. I ain't Kanye 2 Chainz, but I know my way around her birthday. I know this girl Mary Jane. She got the bomb veggie buffet. What? I've been around, yeah, I've been around. Okay. I've been up, yeah, I've been down. I wasn't just a real clown. I keep it clever as a fox now. I've been searching for the truth, babe. I don't wait, I got a clue, babe. Wow. It comes down to what you do, babe. Can you leave your forehead and take a shot? Something in the water. There's something in the water. Go to your shit, yo. Something in the water. Come on, yo.
I ain't made moves like plow on a snow day. Do anything I wanna call it a payday. I don't like boxes like to soar like rockets. My time precious like diamonds. Can you afford it? Cause I'm all up in my head again. Doing what they said I can't. Make it go without a plan. Combat hand in hand. I don't get scared, but I really do care. I drive 1,000 miles just to see your hands in the air.
I'm a honey shitty bee, I'm a root shitty tree. Are you hearing what I mean? We a pair, we a team. If I city for a dream, always aim really big. Even if you miss your mark, it's alright, it's okay. Ooh, yeah. It's alright.
Ooh, I'm wavering. Got the sauce, you can savor it. Now I use my time with just a little more intelligence. Now it's fake cars are a little more fucked it up. That's okay, I do my shit, gotta get it on the dead. Gotta free my time just to feel. Hey, now I use my pain, gotta learn to heal. Mood seems like white oak, stoked, just a love and smoke. Choose this, I choose risk. Dreams big like make a wish. Make a wish wherever you are. Right now. Okay. Hey, that was perfect. We got a couple more for y'all, then we're out of here. 2 more. She got pandas on the socks. Hey, panda socks are cool. The turquoise blue frame. He's got a band. Girls rock. Oh, you know. Oh, full collabo. Let's go. The dopest. Ooh.
I got cash to move, but attitude. Face with the mood and pulling through. I always knew what I had to do. Now I'm on the road now. Now I'm for my own style. This is the freestyle. I don't feel no how. I don't feel no how. Yeah, yeah.
Go ahead and watch me. My flag go highest. Call me your highness. My vibe check right this. Sun in your eyes. Come and set me quickness with a yoga for alignment. My dope the dopest. Go ahead and watch me. My flag go highest. Call me your highness. My vibe check right this. Sun in your eyes. Come and set me quickness with a yoga for alignment. Get that gas, let's go. Maine is where I stay. Vietnam in my soul. Home anywhere I go. Love pops. Now I got pines for boys with a nice side. So high, gotta fly. Get out my mind. Catch me if you can. Kinda hard to find. Say my name. This is no game. Do it every day. No breaks, no complaints. This is everything. This is everything. Yeah. Rocking all boats, no apologies. Right where I wanna be. Always where I ought to be. Calling all the bull if they go off. I am not the best. Only wanna be better than the day before. I like tour. I like Nettie's. I want more. I lift heavy. Getting back my world. Never show off. Yeah. I get more. Yeah. Yeah. My dope, the dopest. Go ahead and watch me. My flow the highest. Call me your highness. My vibe check right this. Sun in your ice shit. Come and such a goodness with your yoga for a life. My dope, the dopest. Go ahead and watch me. My flag go highest. Call me your highness. My vibe check right this. Sun in your ice shit. Come and such a goodness with your yoga for a life. Yo.
I'm grabbing some water, yo.
Okay. We got one last one. You guys know that? One last song. Yeah, it's definitely a water vibe. Water! If you come close, sure you can provide. Please. I am fucking ready, still need back up and a side piece. Only takes one look, and your eyes they speak the rest. See, my poppy tell me well, and we don't do no fake stuff. Yeah, I forgot the words because I was so excited.
Hold up, yo. For real, yo.
That was amazing. You really were.
We're not editing this out at all. This is really what happened.
Right here in the living room.
We got so hype in our own house.
We're
I'm proud of us. I'm proud of us.
Yes, absolutely. We're in Maine right now, just in case you're
Close, please.
I already did the intro.
Back up in the side, please. The Red Sea. I made a mess. Give my soul a place. I eat paper. What did I say? I eat
we are new
breakfast is the
fame,
word,
and we just wanted to get you hype before playing this.
We just having fun.
Yeah.
It's not so serious. Why you so serious?
No, I got this for you.
Don't let me down.
If you coming close, yeah. If you coming close, yeah. If you coming close, be sure you can provide, please. I am fucking magic, still need back up in the side, please. Only takes one look, and your eyes they speak the rest. See, my poppy tell me well, and we don't do no fake stuff. What I did, practice, get my soul to practice. Raise my MC, going big, shout out to Texas. Connection is on Texas, pay attention to the lessons. My DNA is fixing, and the energy is legend. Move like Kennedy, move like Trinity, punch like Kennedy, pretty face and shit. I don't leave you, I will not deceive you. This shit easy, do like the bridge you. This shit grown, do it till the mold. Not some gold, bright like gold, shine the glow, shine
control of chase. See the look on my face. My backstage pain. Like we're shots no chaser. Keep it cool like a glacier. Keep the point of a laser. On my best behavior. There's a tight. Oh yeah. Don't be it, want it, make it mine. Pray to God that love my grind. Fight it, turn it, twist it. Now that you make it. No hit. No one says this is no question. You can't do it once and expect to get somewhere. You can't be afraid to fail. You won't get anywhere. You just gotta go for it. Do what you feel in your heart, and don't listen to anybody else's advice. Start good or bad. You should try. It's a lifestyle, not a diet. It's a lifestyle, not a diet. You should try it. It's a lifestyle, not a diet, bitch. It's a lifestyle, not a diet. You should try it. Touch me now. Usually I wear no bra. Smoke filled car. Favorite panties on. About to be the perfect storm. You should go along. Come on, you should wake up. It's a wild ride. Promise me moonlight. Promise me no flight. Promise me daylight. Never take a sight. Home run, hit the always out of sight. I don't always do it right. I don't even need to. That's how the movies go. Don't ask. I meditated in the Himalayas. Had to learn the basics. Now I'm meditating on these things. Call me keep our case. It's saying the only way that I can penetrate. Seeing beauty in all the ugly. Now I see the face. And now I got a brand new view. That's a light in the dark room. Now a good mood. I got a brand new view. That's a light in the dark room. If you come close, be sure you can provide, please. I am fucking magic, still me back up in the side, please. Only takes one look and your eyes, they speak the rest. See, my poppy taught me well, and we don't do no fake spells. Watch 'em. Yo. We are new thing. Nice
Thanks
to
for
meet you.
hanging out, y'all.
Girls Rock ATX. And if you want to come see us in Austin, we're there Thursday at Empire, the 15th,
It's gonna
July
be fun.
15th.
Come jump with us.
Okay?
So much love.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here this week and spending your mornings with us. We are so happy and thankful that you chose to spend your time with Girls Rock Austin at the Camp Rock-A-Rama Morning Show. So today's our last day, as you know, and we want to make sure that not only do we give shout outs to all the amazing people that helped put this together, but also our amazing campers who just went above and beyond when it came to being creative and expressing their self and their ideas. And we are just so proud and wowed by them.
It's true. These campers have really overcome some challenges this week and have been so open and willing to learn and grow throughout all of them. The results are beautiful, and we can't wait to watch their music videos on Saturday to reap the rewards of all the hard work.
Don't miss it. And thank you so much to Muna Javed, Fern Rojas, Danny Cleveland, Nettie, and our musical guest, New Fame.
Yep, and thanks so much to our partners. We'd love to give a special shout out to the City of Austin Economic Development, Cultural Arts Division, Backstage Chats with Women in Music and the Horizon Foundation, Guitar Center, Stanberry Realtors, Share Tea Realtor, Ice Cream Factory Studios, Halloween Man Comics. Oh yes, that's all of them. I believe I got all of them. Right, Jamie?
Oh yeah.
Okay, cool. And you know, without these folks, this program would not be possible. So special round of applause for our partners. Thank you, thank you.
And speaking of possibilities, we're so happy that you are all filled with unlimited ones. We'd like to thank our volunteers for giving their all this week to every single one of our campers and to just our mission of empowering girls, trans, and non-binary youth through music, education, mentorship, and self-care. You can help us out by making contributions to girlsrockaustin.org. Also, we'd like to thank our amazing staff and campers. And we're looking forward to seeing you all this afternoon in our live virtual workshop. And man, these bands, they are quite amazing. Be sure to mark your calendars for our virtual showcase next Saturday, July 24th, where we'll be screening all of the original music videos for all our bands. They wrote, they directed, and they shot all of these awesome videos. So, can't wait.
Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and tune in with us next Saturday, July 24th. Thanks so much for being with us all week, y'all. Have a great time. Bye.
Bye.